At 3 in the morning, a single father opens his door to find his reclusive billionaire neighbor shaking with fear. Someone just broke into her house. He's exhausted, barely surviving night shifts and raising his kid alone. But he grabs a bat anyway and steps into the dark to protect a woman he's never even spoken to. What he doesn't know yet is that this one choice, to help a stranger in the middle of the night, will pull him into a world of wealth, danger, and a past that refuses to let her go. Some doors, once opened, change everything. If you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this story travels. Let's get into it. Daniel Hayes woke to the sound of knocking. Not polite knocking. Not the kind that came with a neighbor borrowing sugar or a delivery guy leaving a package. This was frantic, sharp, uneven, desperate. The kind that dragged you out of sleep whether you wanted to wake up or not. He blinked in the dark, disoriented. The clock on his nightstand read 3:07 a.m. His body ached from the double shift he'd just finished at the distribution center, and his brain felt like it was swimming through mud. For a second, he thought maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe it was part of a dream he'd already forgotten. Then it came again. Louder this time. Jesus, he muttered, throwing the blanket off and swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His feet hit the cold floor, and he stood up too fast, head spinning. He steadied himself against the wall, blinking hard to clear his vision. The knocking didn't stop. He crossed the small bedroom in 3 steps and glanced down the hallway toward his daughter's room. The door was still closed. Somehow, miraculously, Emma was still asleep. That kid could sleep through a freight train if she had to. He envied her for it. Daniel moved quickly through the living room, past the sagging couch and the pile of laundry he'd been meaning to fold for 2 days. The knocking was coming from the front door, and now that he was closer, he could hear something else beneath it. A voice, muffled but insistent. Please, please, I need help. He stopped in front of the door, hand hovering over the lock. His mind went through the possibilities in rapid succession. Wrong house. Drunk college kid. Someone in actual trouble. Someone pretending to be in trouble so they could rob him the second he opened the door. He didn't have much worth stealing, but still. Who is it? He called through the door, keeping his voice low so it wouldn't wake Emma. There was a pause. Then the voice came back, shaky but clear. It's Victoria, from next door. Please, someone broke into my house. Daniel froze. Victoria Kane. He'd seen her maybe 3 times in the 6 months since she'd moved in next door. And seen was generous, more like glimpsed. She kept to herself in a way that went beyond normal privacy. No visitors, no noise, just the occasional shadow moving past a window or the sound of a car pulling into her driveway late at night. He'd heard things, of course. Small town, people talked. She was rich. Really rich. Some kind of tech billionaire who disappeared from the public eye a year ago and bought the house next door in cash without ever setting foot in it first. The rumors ranged from reasonable to ridiculous, but Daniel had never paid much attention. He had enough going on in his own life without worrying about the personal drama of a neighbor he'd never spoken to. But now she was at his door at 3 in the morning, and she sounded terrified. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Victoria Kane stood on his porch in bare feet and pajamas, soft gray pants and a loose white t-shirt that looked expensive even in the dim glow of the porch light. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and her face was pale, eyes wide and glassy like she'd been crying or was about to start. She had her arms wrapped around herself and she was shaking. I'm sorry, she said immediately, the words tumbling out in a rush. I know it's the middle of the night. I know I didn't know who else to call. I heard glass breaking and I ran. I didn't even think. I just ran. Daniel's brain was still catching up, but his instincts kicked in faster. He glanced past her toward her house. The lights were off. Everything looked still. You heard someone break in? He asked. She nodded, her hands trembling as she gripped her own arms tighter. The back door, I heard the glass shatter. I was upstairs and She stopped, swallowing hard. I grabbed my phone and ran out the front. I didn't see anyone, but I heard them. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. She didn't look like someone who was lying. She looked like someone who'd just been scared out of her mind. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. His first instinct was to tell her to call the cops. That's what you were supposed to do. But he also knew how long it took for a patrol car to show up out here, especially at this hour. 20 minutes, maybe longer. And if someone was actually in her house right now, Okay, he said. Stay here. He turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open behind him. He grabbed his phone off the kitchen counter and then went to the hall closet, pulling out the aluminum baseball bat he kept in the back corner. It wasn't much, but it was something. When he came back to the door, Victoria was still standing in the same spot, arms wrapped around herself, looking small and lost in a way that didn't match the stories he'd heard about her. I'm going to check it out, he said. You stay here. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, call the police. You don't have to, she started, but he was already walking past her, bat in hand. The air outside was cold and damp, the kind of early spring night that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to be winter or something warmer. Daniel crossed the narrow strip of grass between their two houses, his bare feet crunching on gravel as he stepped onto her driveway. Her house was bigger than his, a lot bigger. 2 stories, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows that probably cost more than his car. It looked like the kind of place you saw in magazines, not the kind of place you expected to find in a town like this. He moved around the side of the house, keeping the bat raised, his pulse starting to pick up now that the adrenaline was kicking in. The backyard was fenced in, but the gate was open. He pushed through it slowly, scanning the shadows. The back door was glass, or it had been. Now it was a jagged frame with shards scattered across the stone patio. The door itself was hanging open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Daniel's grip tightened on the bat. He stepped carefully over the broken glass and into the house. Inside, everything was dark and silent. He waited for his eyes to adjust, listening hard for any sound, footsteps, breathing, anything. But there was nothing, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock somewhere deeper in the house. He moved through the kitchen slowly, bat raised, checking corners and doorways. The place was pristine, marble countertops, high-end appliances, everything spotless and sterile like no one actually lived here. It didn't feel like a home, it felt like a showroom. He checked the living room next. Same thing. Expensive furniture, perfectly arranged, not a thing out of place. No signs of a struggle, no signs that anyone had been here at all except for the broken door. He moved upstairs, taking the steps slowly, testing each one before putting his full weight on it. The second floor had 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, all of them empty. No one hiding in closets, no one under the beds. Just silence. By the time he made it back downstairs, he was starting to think whoever had broken in was already gone. Maybe they'd heard Victoria run and decided it wasn't worth the risk. Maybe they'd only been looking for a quick grab and didn't find anything worth taking. He checked the rest of the first floor, office, laundry room, pantry, and came up empty. Finally, he went back outside and circled the house one more time, checking the windows and the fence line. Nothing. No footprints in the dirt, no broken branches, no sign of anyone. When he came back around to the front, Victoria was still standing on his porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching him. Anything? She asked. He shook his head. Whoever it was, they're gone. Back door's smashed, but I didn't see anyone inside. She let out a breath, her shoulders sagging with something that looked like relief, but also exhaustion. Thank you, she said quietly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have dragged you into this. It's fine, Daniel said. He glanced back at her house, then at her. She still looked shaken. You call the cops? She hesitated. Not yet. He frowned. You should. Even if they're gone, you need a report, insurance and all that. I know. She looked down at her hands. She stopped, then shook her head. Never mind, you're right. I'll call them. There was something off about the way she said it, but Daniel didn't push. It wasn't his business. You got somewhere you can stay tonight? He asked. Friend? Family? She shook her head. No, not really. He looked at her for a long moment. She was still shaking, still pale, still looked like she might fall over if the wind picked up. You can crash on my couch, he said before he could talk himself out of it. Just for tonight, until you get the door fixed and figure out what's going on. She blinked at him, surprised. I can't. It's fine, he said. I'm not going to sleep anyway. Might as well make sure you're not alone. For a second, she just stared at him, like she couldn't quite believe what he was offering. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. Daniel's couch was older than his daughter and about half as comfortable, but Victoria didn't complain. She sat on one end with her knees pulled up to her chest, a blanket draped over her shoulders, and a mug of tea that Daniel had made but she hadn't touched. He sat in the armchair across from her, the bat leaning against the wall next to him, his phone on the armrest just in case. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Victoria spoke, her voice soft and a little hoarse. "I'm sorry about this." "You already said that," Daniel replied. "I mean it." She looked down at the mug in her hands. "You don't even know me. You didn't have to help." "Yeah, well," he shrugged. "You asked." She glanced up at him, something unreadable in her expression. "Most people wouldn't have." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. After another stretch of silence, she asked, "Do you live here alone?" "No," he said. "I've got a daughter, Emma. She's 5. She's asleep." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Just the two of you?" "Yeah." She didn't ask where Emma's mother was, and Daniel was grateful for that. He didn't feel like explaining tonight. "What about you?" he asked. "You got family around here?" She shook her head. "No, just me." "Friends?" Another shake of the head. Daniel frowned. "Then why move here? No offense, but this town's not exactly a hotspot for billionaires." She gave a faint, humorless smile. "That's exactly why I moved here." He didn't push for more, but she kept talking anyway, her voice quiet and distant. "I needed to disappear for a while," she said. "Get away from everything. This place seemed quiet, private, safe." She let out a bitter laugh. "Guess I was wrong about that last part." Daniel watched her carefully. There was something in the way she said it, something heavy, like she wasn't just talking about a break-in. "You think someone followed you here?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it was just random. Bad luck." She didn't sound convinced. Daniel leaned back in the chair, rubbing his eyes. He was exhausted, his body screaming for sleep, but his mind wouldn't shut off. "You should still call the cops," he said. "I will," she said. "In the morning." "Why not now?" She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something sharp behind her eyes, something guarded. "Because I don't want to deal with it tonight," she said simply. He could have argued, but he didn't. He got the sense that Victoria Kane was used to dealing with things on her own terms, and pushing her wouldn't get him anywhere. Instead, he stood up and grabbed a pillow from the hall closet, tossing it onto the couch next to her. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll be in the next room if you need anything." She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Daniel turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Daniel?" He looked back. "Thank you," she said again, quieter this time. He nodded once and walked down the hall. When Daniel woke up a few hours later, the sun was just starting to creep through the blinds, painting the room in pale gray light. He could hear Emma moving around in her room, probably already awake and getting into something she shouldn't be. He dragged himself out of bed and shuffled into the hallway, running a hand through his hair. Victoria was still on the couch, curled up under the blanket, her eyes closed. She looked smaller in the daylight, more fragile somehow. Daniel hesitated for a second, then walked past her quietly into the kitchen. He started the coffee maker and pulled out a box of cereal for Emma, who came padding into the kitchen a moment later in her pajamas, her hair sticking up in about 12 different directions. "Morning, Bug," he said. "Morning, Daddy." She climbed up into her chair at the table, rubbing her eyes. Then she noticed the blanket-covered figure on the couch and froze. "Who's that?" "That's our neighbor," Daniel said, keeping his voice low. "She had some trouble at her house last night, so she stayed here. Be quiet, okay? Let her sleep." Emma nodded solemnly, her eyes wide with curiosity. Daniel poured her cereal and milk, then made himself a cup of coffee, leaning against the counter and staring out the window at the house next door. In the daylight, it looked perfectly normal, peaceful even. You'd never know anything had happened. He didn't know what to make of Victoria Kane. She was a mystery wrapped in a bigger mystery, and he didn't have the time or energy to figure it out. He had his own life to worry about. His job, his kid, the bills that kept piling up faster than he could pay them. But there was something about the way she'd looked at him last night. Something that made him feel like she wasn't just scared of whoever had broken into her house. She was scared of something bigger. And Daniel Hayes, who barely had his own life together, had somehow just become part of it. Victoria woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a child's voice asking questions in a loud whisper. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came back in a rush, the sound of breaking glass, the panic, the run across the dark yard to the only house with a light on, the man who'd opened the door without hesitation. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. Her body ached like she'd been running for miles, even though she'd barely moved. That's what fear did to you. It crawled into your muscles and stayed there. The little girl at the kitchen table was staring at her now, wide-eyed and curious. She had her father's dark hair and the kind of face that looked like it smiled a lot. "Hi," the girl said. "Hi," Victoria replied, her voice rough from sleep. Daniel appeared in the doorway, a mug of coffee in one hand. He looked tired, really tired, but he gave her a small nod. "Morning," he said. "Coffee?" "Please." He poured her a cup and brought it over, setting it on the coffee table in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat seep into her palms. "Thanks," she said, "for everything." "Don't worry about it." He sat down in the armchair again, the same spot he'd been in last night. "You sleep okay?" She nodded, even though it wasn't really true. She'd slept in fits and starts, waking up every time the house made a sound, every time a car passed outside. "I should go," she said, starting to stand. "Hang on." Daniel held up a hand. "You check your house yet?" She shook her head. "Then sit tight for a second. I'll walk over with you, make sure everything's clear." Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he'd done enough already. But the truth was, she didn't want to walk back into that house alone. Not yet. So she nodded and sat back down. Emma was still watching her from the table, swinging her legs and eating cereal one piece at a time. "Are you a princess?" Emma asked suddenly. Victoria blinked. "What?" "Emma," Daniel said, a warning in his tone. "You live in a big house," Emma continued, undeterred, "and you have pretty hair, so I thought maybe you were a princess." Despite everything, Victoria felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "No," she said, "I'm not a princess." "Oh." Emma looked disappointed for about half a second, then shrugged and went back to her cereal. Daniel shook his head, but there was the faintest hint of a smile on his face. 10 minutes later, they walked across the yard together, Daniel in front, Victoria a few steps behind. The broken glass was still scattered across the patio, glittering in the morning light. Daniel pushed the door open carefully and stepped inside. Victoria followed, her stomach twisting into knots. Everything looked the same as it had the night before, untouched, undisturbed, like nothing had happened at all, except for the door. "You got someone who can fix this today?" Daniel asked, nudging a piece of glass with his shoe. "I'll call someone," Victoria said. "Good, and you're calling the cops, right?" She hesitated, and he turned to look at her. "Victoria," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You need to report this." "I know." She took a breath. "I will." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I got to get Emma ready for daycare and head to work. You need anything before I go?" She shook her head. "No. You've done more than enough." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. "Okay," he said. "But if anything else happens, anything, you come get me. Got it?" "Got it." He gave her one last look, then turned and walked back across the yard. Victoria stood in the middle of her kitchen, alone again, staring at the broken door. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over the number for the local police. Then she stopped, because she knew, deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, that this wasn't random. Someone had found her, and calling the police wouldn't change that. Daniel dropped Emma off at daycare and made it to work 10 minutes late, which earned him a look from his supervisor, but no real lecture. He clocked in, grabbed his scanner, and started loading trucks like he did every morning. The work was mindless, repetitive, exactly what he needed to keep his brain from spinning out. But no matter how hard he tried to focus, his thoughts kept drifting back to Victoria. The way she'd looked when she showed up at his door. The way she'd hesitated when he told her to call the cops. The way she'd said she moved here to disappear. People didn't just disappear for no reason. By the time his shift ended, he was exhausted and sore and ready to collapse. But instead of going straight home, he stopped by the hardware store and picked up a replacement pane of glass and some supplies. He told himself it was just being neighborly, that anyone would do the same. But the truth was, he couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria was in over her head. And for some reason he couldn't explain, He wanted to help. When he pulled into his driveway that evening, he saw her standing in her yard, arms crossed, staring at her back door like she was trying to decide whether to burn the whole house down or just walk away. He grabbed the supplies from his truck and walked over. "I can fix that," he said. She turned, startled. "What?" He held up the glass. "Your door. I can fix it. Won't take long." She stared at him like he'd just spoken a different language. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know. I can hire someone." "I'm sure you can." "So why?" "Because I'm here," Daniel said simply. "And I've got the stuff. So unless you've got a problem with it, I'm fixing your door." For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay." He got to work, and she stood nearby watching in silence. It didn't take long, maybe 20 minutes, to pull out the broken glass, fit the new pane, and seal it up. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. When he was done, he stepped back and wiped his hands on his jeans. "There," he said. "Good as new. Well, good enough anyway." "Thank you," Victoria said quietly. He shrugged. "No problem." She hesitated, then said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you doing this?" Daniel looked at her, caught off guard by the question. "Doing what?" he asked. "Helping me. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. So why?" He thought about it for a second, then shrugged again. "Because you needed help," he said. "And I could give it, that's all." She looked at him like she didn't quite believe him, but she didn't argue. "Well," she said. "Thank you. Really." He nodded, picking up the leftover supplies. "You gonna be okay tonight?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "I think so." "All right. But if you're not, if you hear anything, see anything, you come get me. I mean it." "I will." He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. "Hey," he said. "You ever figure out who broke in?" She shook her head. "No, the police came by earlier. They said it was probably just someone looking for an easy score. Wrong house, wrong night." "You believe that?" She looked down at the ground. "I don't know." Daniel didn't know either, but something about the whole thing didn't sit right. "Just be careful," he said. "I will." He gave her a small nod and walked back to his house, glancing over his shoulder once before going inside. Victoria stood in her yard for a long time after he left, staring at the door he'd just fixed. She didn't know why Daniel Hayes had decided to help her. She didn't know what he wanted, or if he wanted anything at all. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. And that scared her almost as much as the break-in had. The next few days passed in a strange kind of rhythm that Daniel couldn't quite name. He went to work, picked up Emma, made dinner, put her to bed. The usual routine. But now there was something else woven into it. Something that hadn't been there before. Victoria. Not that she was intrusive. She wasn't. In fact, she kept to herself just like she always had. But now Daniel found himself noticing things. The lights going on in her house at odd hours. Her car pulling in late at night. The way she'd sometimes stand in her backyard, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing. He told himself it wasn't his business. That he'd done his part, fixed her door, made sure she was safe. That was enough. But on the third night after the break-in, he was washing dishes when he glanced out the window and saw her standing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, her whole body tense. Even from a distance, he could see she was upset. He dried his hands on a dish towel and walked outside, crossing the yard before he could talk himself out of it. Victoria didn't notice him at first. She was pacing now, one hand pressed to her forehead, her voice low and sharp. "I don't care what you think is reasonable," she was saying. "I'm not coming back. No, that's not—" She stopped mid-sentence, her jaw tightening. "Don't call me again." She ended the call and stood there for a moment, breathing hard, staring down at the phone in her hand like she wanted to throw it. "You okay?" Daniel asked. She spun around, startled, and for a second he thought she might actually throw the phone at him instead. "Sorry," he said, holding up his hands. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you." She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. "It's fine. She shook her head. "I didn't hear you." "Yeah, I got that." He took a step closer, keeping his voice easy. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," she said, but the way she said it made it clear she wasn't. Daniel didn't push. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting. After a long moment, Victoria looked up at him, something tired and defeated in her eyes. Do you ever feel like no matter how far you run, the things you're trying to escape just follow you anyway? She asked. He thought about that for a second, then nodded. Yeah, I do. She seemed surprised by that. Really? Sure. He shrugged. I mean, I'm not running from a billion-dollar empire or whatever, but yeah. Some things stick with you, whether you want them to or not. She almost smiled at that. Almost. What are you running from? She asked. Daniel hesitated. He didn't talk about this stuff. Not with anyone. But something about the way she was looking at him, like she actually wanted to know, made him answer anyway. My ex-wife, he said. Emma's mom. She left when Emma was 2. Just decided one day she didn't want to be a mother anymore. Didn't want to be married anymore, so she left. Victoria's expression softened. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. He paused. But yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I did wrong, what I could have done different. Took me a while to realize it wasn't about me. Some people just aren't built for that kind of life. And you are? Victoria asked. I don't know, Daniel said honestly, but I didn't have a choice. Emma needed someone, so I figured it out. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and he got the sense she was trying to decide whether to say something. Finally, she did. The person on the phone, she said, well, that was my ex. Daniel didn't say anything, just waited. He's the reason I left, she continued, her voice quieter now. The reason I disappeared. He's controlling, obsessive. When we were together, he made every decision for me. Where I worked, who I saw, what I said in public. I didn't even realize how bad it was until I tried to leave. What happened when you did? Daniel asked. She looked away. He didn't take it well. He made things difficult, professionally, personally. He has a lot of power, a lot of connections. For a while, I thought he'd never let me go. But you got out. I did. She exhaled slowly. But he still calls. Still tries to pull me back. And every time I think I'm finally free, he finds a way to remind me that he's still there. Daniel felt a flicker of anger, sharp and sudden. He didn't even know this guy, but he already hated him. You think he's the one who broke into your house? He asked. Victoria hesitated. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe he hired someone to scare me. He's done things like that before. Then you need to tell the cops. And say what? She asked, her voice edged with frustration. That my ex-boyfriend is harassing me? That I think he might have broken into my house, but I have no proof? You know how that sounds? Yeah, Daniel said. It sounds like someone who needs help. She shook her head. It's not that simple. Why not? Because people like him don't get held accountable, she said, her voice sharp now. They're too rich, too connected, too good at making themselves look like the victim. I've been through this before, Daniel. I know how it ends. He didn't have an answer for that, because she was probably right. They stood there in silence for a moment, the night air cold and still around them. Then Daniel said, You can't just let him keep doing this. I'm not, Victoria said. I'm here, aren't I? I left. I started over. I'm trying. I know, he said. But trying isn't enough if you're still scared. She looked at him, something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. I don't know how not to be. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. So instead, he just said, You want to come inside? Have some coffee or something? You look like you could use it. Victoria blinked, surprised. I don't want to. You're not imposing, he said. Emma's already asleep. It's just me and a pot of coffee that's too strong. Come on. She hesitated for a second, then nodded. They walked back to his house together, and Daniel poured them both coffee while Victoria sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around the mug like she was trying to steal its warmth. This place is nice, she said, glancing around. Daniel snorted. It's a dump. It's not. She looked at the drawing stuck to the fridge with magnets, the pile of toys in the corner, the stack of library books on the counter. It feels like a home. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just took a sip of his coffee. Can I ask you something? Victoria said after a moment. Sure. Why are you being so nice to me? Daniel frowned. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. You don't know me. You have your own life, your own problems. So why do you keep helping? He thought about it, then shrugged. I don't know. Guess I figure everyone needs someone in their corner, and it seems like you don't have a lot of people in yours. Victoria looked down at her coffee. I don't. Then there you go. She was quiet for a long time after that, and Daniel let the silence stretch. He'd learned a long time ago that sometimes people needed space to think, to process, without someone trying to fill every gap with words. Finally, Victoria said, Thank you. You keep saying that. Because I mean it. He nodded, and they sat there together, drinking coffee in a kitchen that smelled like dish soap and crayons, while the rest of the world stayed quiet outside. When Victoria finally left, it was past midnight. Daniel walked her to the door and watched as she crossed the yard back to her house, her silhouette disappearing into the dark. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't know if he was helping or just getting himself tangled up in something he didn't understand. But he couldn't walk away. Not yet. The next morning, Daniel woke up to Emma jumping on his bed, her small hand shaking his shoulder. Daddy, wake up! We're going to be late! He groaned and pulled the pillow over his head. 5 more minutes, Bug. No, you said we're getting pancakes today. That got his attention. He cracked one eye open and looked at her. I said that? Yes, she nodded emphatically. You promised. He had no memory of promising pancakes, but he also knew better than to argue with a 5-year-old who had her heart set on something. All right, he said, sitting up. Pancakes it is. 20 minutes later, they were at the diner down the street, Emma bouncing in the booth while Daniel nursed his second cup of coffee and tried to wake up. The waitress brought their food, a stack of chocolate chip pancakes for Emma, scrambled eggs and toast for Daniel, and Emma immediately dug in, syrup dripping everywhere. Slow down, Daniel said. You're going to choke. I'm hungry. Yeah, I can see that. He was halfway through his eggs when the door to the diner opened and Victoria walked in. She looked different in the daylight, less guarded, maybe. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she seemed almost surprised to see him. Daniel, she said, stopping by their table. Hey, he said. You eating here? I was going to get something to go. She glanced at Emma, who was staring at her with wide, curious eyes. But I don't want to interrupt. You're not, Daniel said. Sit. Join us. Victoria hesitated, then slid into the booth across from him. Emma leaned forward, syrup on her chin. Are you the lady from the other night? Emma, Daniel said, but Victoria smiled. I am, she said. My name's Victoria. I'm Emma. She held up her fork. Do you like pancakes? I do. You should get some. They're really good. Victoria glanced at Daniel and he shrugged. She's not wrong. So Victoria ordered pancakes and they sat there together, this strange, mismatched trio, while Emma chattered about her favorite cartoons and the butterflies she'd seen at daycare and how her best friend Lucy had lost a tooth. Victoria listened, really listened, in a way that made Daniel think she wasn't used to being around kids. But she didn't seem uncomfortable. If anything, she seemed almost relieved. When they finished eating, Daniel paid the bill and they walked out together, Emma skipping ahead toward the car. She's sweet, Victoria said. She's a handful, Daniel replied, but there was affection in his voice. Victoria smiled, then hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever get scared, raising her alone? Daniel thought about it. All the time. How do you deal with it? I don't know, he said honestly. I just keep going. Figure it out as I go. Some days are better than others. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away somewhere. You're doing a good job, she said quietly. He looked at her, surprised. You don't even know me. I know enough. They stood there for a moment, the morning sun warm on their faces, and Daniel felt something shift, something small but significant. Listen, he said. If you ever need anything, I mean it, anything, you know where to find me. Victoria met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked like she actually believed him. Thank you, she said. I'll remember that. Over the next week, something changed between them. It was subtle at first. Small things that didn't seem like much on their own, but added up to something bigger. Victoria started coming over more often. Not every day, but enough that it became almost normal. She'd bring coffee in the morning or stop by in the evening to ask Daniel's opinion on something small, a contractor's quote, a weird noise her car was making, whether the tree in her yard needed trimming. Daniel knew what she was really doing. She was checking in, making sure she wasn't alone, and he didn't mind. One night, she showed up with takeout. "I didn't know if you'd eaten yet," she said, holding up the bag. "I got Chinese, too much for just me." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You just happened to order too much?" "Yes." "Uh-huh." She smiled, and he stepped aside to let her in. They ate at the kitchen table, Emma between them, talking non-stop about the art project she'd made at school. Victoria asked questions, real questions, not the kind adults asked just to be polite, and Emma lit up under the attention. After dinner, Emma dragged Victoria into the living room to show her the elaborate fort she'd built out of couch cushions and blankets. "This is very impressive," Victoria said, crouching down to peer inside. "You can come in if you want," Emma said. "I'd be honored." Daniel watched from the doorway as the two of them crawled into the fort, Emma pointing out all the different rooms and explaining the rules for entering. He didn't know what to make of it. This version of Victoria, who laughed at a 5-year-old's jokes and didn't seem to mind getting her expensive sweater covered in crumbs. But he liked it. After Emma went to bed, Victoria helped Daniel clean up the kitchen, even though he told her she didn't have to. "I don't mind," she said, drying a plate. "It's nice. Feels normal." "Normal's overrated," Daniel said. She smiled. "Maybe, but I'll take it anyway." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and when the dishes were done, Victoria leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Sure." "I haven't felt this settled in a long time. Being here, with you and Emma, it's the first time in months I haven't felt like I'm looking over my shoulder." Daniel looked at her, and he could see the truth of it in her eyes. "I'm glad," he said. "Me too." She paused, then added, "But I don't want to overstep. I know this isn't... we're just neighbors. I don't want to make things weird." "You're not making things weird," Daniel said. "And for what it's worth, I don't think of you as just a neighbor anymore." She looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "No?" "No." They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Then Victoria's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her whole body went rigid. "What is it?" Daniel asked. She didn't answer, just stared at the phone, her face pale. "Victoria," he said, stepping closer. "What's wrong?" She turned the phone toward him, and he saw the message on the screen. "I know where you are." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That him?" She nodded, her hand trembling slightly. "Block the number," he said. "I've tried. He just gets a new one. Then we go to the police, file a restraining order." "Daniel, I told you." "I don't care what you told me," he said, his voice firm. "This is harassment. You don't have to deal with this alone." She looked at him, and he could see the fear in her eyes. Real, bone-deep fear that had nothing to do with a broken window and everything to do with a man who wouldn't let her go. "What if it makes things worse?" she asked quietly. "What if it doesn't?" She didn't have an answer for that. Daniel reached out and gently took the phone from her hand, setting it on the counter. "Listen to me," he said. "You don't have to be afraid of him. Not here. Not while I'm around. You don't know what he's capable of." "Maybe not," Daniel said, "but I know what I'm capable of, and I'm not letting him hurt you." Victoria stared at him, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." The next day, Daniel took a personal day from work and went with Victoria to the police station. The officer who took their report was polite but skeptical. He listened as Victoria explained the text, the phone calls, the break-in, and he nodded in all the right places. But Daniel could see it in his eyes. He didn't think it was serious. "We can file a report," the officer said, "but without concrete evidence that he was involved in the break-in, there's not much we can do. Have you considered getting a restraining order?" "I have one," Victoria said, "from when I left. He violated it twice. Nothing happened." The officer sighed. "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but unless he makes an explicit threat or shows up in person, our hands are tied." Daniel felt his temper flare. "So you're saying she has to wait until he does something worse?" I'm saying we need evidence to act on, the officer said, his tone hardening slightly. We can't arrest someone based on a feeling. Victoria put a hand on Daniel's arm, her touch light but grounding. It's fine, she said quietly. Thank you for your time. They left the station and Daniel was still fuming when they got back to the car. That's bullshit, he said. I know. They should be doing more. They can't, Victoria said, not without proof. And he's too smart to give them any. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. So what do we do? We keep going, she said. What else can we do? He looked at her, and he saw the exhaustion in her face, the weight of carrying this alone for so long. We make sure you're not alone, he said. That's what we do. She met his eyes, and something in her expression softened. Thank you, she said. Stop thanking me. I can't help it. That night, Daniel installed a new security system at Victoria's house. Motion sensors, cameras, the works. It wasn't top of the line, but it was better than nothing. Victoria watched him work, handing him tools when he needed them, asking questions about how it all worked. You didn't have to do this, she said. Yeah, I did. Why? He looked at her, and for once, he didn't have a quick answer. Because I care, he said finally, about what happens to you. I don't know when that started, but it did. So yeah, I had to. Victoria stared at him, and he saw something in her eyes, something vulnerable and unguarded. I care too, she said quietly. They stood there in her living room, the space between them suddenly feeling much smaller. Daniel opened his mouth to say something. He didn't even know what, but before he could, his phone rang. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen. Daycare. Hang on, he said, answering. Hello? Mr. Hayes, this is Linda from Little Sprouts. Emma's running a fever. You need to come pick her up. I'll be right there. He hung up and looked at Victoria apologetically. I gotta go. Emma's sick. Go, she said. I'll finish up here. You sure? I'm sure. Go take care of your daughter. He hesitated for a second, then nodded and headed for the door. But before he left, he turned back. Lock the doors, he said, and call me if anything happens. Anything. I will. He drove to the daycare, his mind still half on Victoria, half on Emma. When he got there, Emma was sitting in the nurse's office, her face flushed and her eyes glassy. Hey, Bug, he said, crouching down in front of her. How you feeling? My tummy hurts, she said in a small voice. All right. Let's get you home. He signed her out and carried her to the car, her small body hot against his chest. By the time they got home, she was half asleep, so he put her straight to bed and sat beside her, stroking her hair until she drifted off. He stayed there for a while, watching her breathe, feeling the familiar weight of worry settle over him. Being a parent meant living in a constant state of low-level panic. Every fever, every cough, every scraped knee felt like the end of the world until it wasn't. But he wouldn't trade it, not for anything. When he finally went back to the living room, he found a text from Victoria. System's all set. Thank you again. Hope Emma's okay, he typed back. She'll be fine, just a bug. You good? Yeah. Locked up tight. Good. Sleep well. You too. He set his phone down and leaned back on the couch, exhaustion pulling at him. He didn't know what he was doing with Victoria. Didn't know where this was going or if it was going anywhere at all. But he knew one thing. He wasn't walking away. Emma's fever broke by morning, but Daniel kept her home from daycare anyway. She spent most of the day curled up on the couch with her favorite blanket, watching cartoons while Daniel worked from his laptop at the kitchen table, answering emails and rescheduling the shifts he'd missed. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find Victoria standing there with a grocery bag in her arms. I brought soup, she said, and crackers, and ginger ale. I wasn't sure what she'd want. He blinked at her, surprised. You didn't have to do that. I know? She shifted the bag slightly. Can I come in? Yeah, of course. She stepped inside and Emma's head popped up from the couch. Victoria, she said, her voice hoarse but excited. Hey, sweetheart, Victoria said, setting the bag on the counter. I heard you weren't feeling well. I had a fever, Emma said proudly, like it was an accomplishment. That sounds terrible. Victoria walked over and sat on the edge of the couch. Are you feeling better now? Emma nodded. A little. Daddy gave me medicine. Good. I brought you some soup. Do you like chicken noodle? Emma's eyes lit up. Yes. Victoria glanced at Daniel. Is it okay if I heat some up for her? Yeah, he said. Go ahead. She went to the kitchen and started unpacking the bag. Soup, crackers, ginger ale, and a stuffed bear with a little get-well-soon ribbon tied around its neck. Daniel watched her, something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest. You really didn't have to do all this, he said quietly. I wanted to. She poured the soup into a pot and turned on the stove. Besides, you've done so much for me. It's the least I can do. It's not a scorecard, Victoria. She looked at him and there was something soft in her expression. I know, but still. When the soup was ready, Victoria brought it over to Emma, who ate it slowly, savoring each bite like it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. This is really good, Emma said. I'm glad. Victoria smiled. My mom used to make it for me when I was sick. Emma looked up at her, curious. Where's your mom now? Victoria's smile faltered, just slightly. She passed away a few years ago. Oh. Emma frowned. I'm sorry. It's okay, Victoria said gently. But thank you. Daniel watched the exchange, his chest tightening. He hadn't known that about Victoria, that she'd lost her mother. She didn't talk about her family much, didn't talk about her past at all, really, except for the pieces that involved her ex. After Emma finished eating, she fell asleep on the couch again, the stuffed bear tucked under her arm. Victoria helped Daniel clean up, and they worked in silence for a while, the kind of silence that felt easy instead of awkward. She's a good kid, Victoria said, drying the last bowl. She is, Daniel agreed. Too good for me, probably. Victoria looked at him, her expression serious. Don't say that. I'm just being honest. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together. You're doing fine, Daniel. Better than fine. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment. I'm doing the best I can, that's all. That's all anyone can do. They stood there for a moment, and then Victoria said, Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever think about dating again? Meeting someone? Daniel laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. When would I have time for that? I work, I take care of Emma, I sleep. That's pretty much it. But if you did have time. He thought about it, then shrugged. I don't know, maybe. But it's complicated, you know. I've got Emma to think about. I can't just bring someone into her life unless I'm sure they're going to stick around. She's already lost one parent. I'm not putting her through that again. Victoria nodded slowly. That makes sense. What about you? Daniel asked. You ever think about it, trying again? She let out a bitter laugh. No, not after... She stopped, shaking her head. I don't trust myself to pick the right person, clearly. You were young, Daniel said. People make mistakes. Some mistakes cost more than others. He wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't her fault, but he got the sense she wouldn't believe him. Instead, he said, You're allowed to move on, you know. You don't have to let him keep controlling your life. I'm not, she said. I left. I'm here. Yeah, but you're still looking over your shoulder, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. She looked at him, and he saw the truth of it in her eyes. I don't know how to stop, she admitted. Then maybe you need to give yourself permission to try. She didn't respond, but he could see her turning the words over in her mind. Before either of them could say anything else, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. What is it? Victoria asked. Work, he said. They need me to come in tonight. Someone called out. Victoria's expression shifted. What about Emma? I'll figure something out. Maybe see if one of the neighbors can watch her for a few hours. I can do it, Victoria said. Daniel looked at her, surprised. You sure? Of course. I'm here anyway, and she's already asleep. He hesitated. He didn't like leaving Emma with people he didn't know well, but Victoria wasn't a stranger. Not anymore. Okay, he said finally. But if she wakes up and needs anything, I'll call you, Victoria said. I promise. Daniel nodded, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. Thanks. I owe you. No, you don't. He gave her a small smile, then headed out the door. Victoria stood in the quiet house listening to the sound of Emma's breathing from the couch. She felt a strange sense of calm settle over her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. This was what normal felt like. This was what safety felt like, and she wasn't ready to let it go. Emma woke up an hour later, groggy and disoriented. She looked around, her eyes landing on Victoria, and for a second she seemed confused. "Where's Daddy?" she asked. "He had to go to work for a little bit," Victoria said gently. "But he'll be back soon. I'm going to stay with you until he gets home. Is that okay?" Emma nodded, rubbing her eyes. "Okay. Are you hungry? Thirsty? Can I have some juice?" "Of course." Victoria went to the kitchen and poured a small cup of apple juice, bringing it back to Emma. The little girl drank it slowly, her eyes half closed. "Do you want to watch a movie?" Victoria asked. Emma perked up slightly. "Can we watch Frozen?" Victoria smiled. "Sure." She found the movie on the streaming service and started it, settling onto the couch next to Emma. The little girl leaned against her, and Victoria felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt needed like this. Useful. Important in a way that had nothing to do with money or power or what she could do for someone. It was just her and this little girl watching a movie about a princess and her sister, and it was enough. When Daniel got home just after midnight, he found them both asleep on the couch. Emma curled up under her blanket, Victoria sitting upright with her head tilted back, one arm draped protectively over Emma's shoulders. He stood there for a moment, just looking at them, and something in his chest tightened. He didn't know what this was, didn't know what it meant. But he knew he didn't want it to end. He gently shook Victoria's shoulder, and she woke with a start, blinking up at him. "Hey," he said softly. "Sorry. Didn't mean to scare you." "It's okay." She glanced at Emma, still fast asleep. "How was work?" "Long," he said. "But I'm back now. You can head home if you want." Victoria stood, stretching slightly. "She's a sweet kid, Daniel. You're lucky." "I know." She looked at him for a moment, and he saw something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite name. "Thank you," he said, "for staying with her, for everything." "You don't have to keep thanking me." "Yeah, I do." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made him forget how tired he was. "Good night, Daniel," she said. "Good night." He walked her to the door and watched as she crossed the yard back to her house. Then he went back inside, locked the door, and carried Emma to her bed. As he tucked her in, she stirred slightly, mumbling something he couldn't quite make out. "What's that, Bug?" he whispered. "I like Victoria," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "Me too." The next few days passed without incident. Daniel went back to work, Emma went back to daycare, and Victoria seemed to settle into a rhythm that involved stopping by more often than not. She brought coffee in the mornings, helped Emma with a school project about butterflies, fixed the leaky faucet in Daniel's bathroom without being asked. It was strange, this new normal, but it was also nice. Then, one evening, everything changed. Daniel was in the kitchen making dinner when he heard a car pull up outside. He glanced out the window and froze. A sleek black sedan was parked in Victoria's driveway, and a man in an expensive suit was stepping out. Daniel didn't recognize him, but something about the way he moved, confident, entitled, like he owned the place, set off alarm bells. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and walked to the window, watching as the man approached Victoria's front door. Before the man could knock, the door opened. Victoria stood there, her face pale, her whole body rigid. Daniel couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the tension in Victoria's posture, the way she held the door like a shield between herself and the man. The man stepped closer, and Victoria took a step back. That was all Daniel needed to see. He turned to Emma, who was coloring at the table. "Stay here, Bug. I'll be right back." "Okay, Daddy." He walked out the front door and crossed the yard, his heart pounding in his chest. As he got closer, he could hear the man's voice, smooth, calm, but with an edge underneath. "You can't keep avoiding me, Victoria. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Victoria said, her voice tight. "I told you to leave me alone." "You don't mean that." "Yes, I do." The man sighed like he was dealing with a petulant child. "Victoria, be reasonable. You're throwing away everything we built together because of some misguided idea that you're better off alone. You're not. You need me." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do. And deep down, you know it." Daniel stepped up onto the porch. She said, "Leave her alone." The man turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to cool appraisal as he looked Daniel up and down. "And who are you?" he asked. "A friend," Daniel said evenly. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. A friend. How quaint. He looked back at Victoria. Is this what you've been doing? Slumming it with the locals? Don't talk to him like that, Victoria said, her voice sharp. Or what? The man took a step closer to her, and Daniel moved without thinking, putting himself between them. Back off, Daniel said, his voice low and hard. The man raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? You heard me. She doesn't want you here, so leave. For a moment, the man just stared at him, and Daniel could see the calculation in his eyes, sizing him up, deciding whether he was a threat. Then the man smiled again, that same cold, empty smile. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he said. Don't care, Daniel replied. The man's smile faded. Victoria, we're going to finish this conversation. Whether it's now or later is up to you. It's later, Daniel said, or never. Either works. The man's jaw tightened, and for a second Daniel thought he might actually try something, but then he took a step back, his expression smoothing out. Fine, he said, but this isn't over, Victoria. You know it isn't. He turned and walked back to his car, getting in without another word. A moment later, the engine roared to life, and he pulled out of the driveway, disappearing down the street. Daniel waited until the car was out of sight before turning to Victoria. She was shaking, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale. You okay? He asked. She nodded, but her eyes said otherwise. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you inside. She didn't argue. She just turned and walked into the house, and Daniel followed, closing the door behind them. Inside, Victoria sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. That was him, wasn't it? Daniel asked. Your ex. She nodded. What did he want? Me, she said quietly. He wants me back. He always wants me back. Daniel sat down next to her, his anger still simmering just below the surface. He can't just show up like that, he said. You have a restraining order. It expired last month, she said. I didn't renew it. I thought if I stayed quiet, stayed hidden, he'd move on. I was wrong. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration building in his chest. You need to get another one. Today. It won't stop him, she said. He doesn't care about rules. He thinks he's above them. Then we make him care. She looked at him, something desperate in her eyes. How? Daniel didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He kept seeing the way Victoria's ex had looked at her, like she was something he owned, something he had every right to take back. And he kept thinking about the way Victoria had looked afterward. Broken, scared, like all the progress she'd made had been erased in a single conversation. Around 2 a.m, he gave up on sleep and got out of bed. He walked to the window and looked out at Victoria's house. The lights were on. He grabbed his phone and texted her. You okay? A minute later, she replied. Can't sleep. Me either. Want company? There was a long pause, then, yeah. He pulled on a sweatshirt and walked over, knocking softly on her door. She opened it almost immediately, and he could see she'd been crying. Hey, he said. Hey. They stood there for a moment, and then she stepped aside to let him in. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock somewhere in another room. Victoria led him to the living room, and they sat on the couch, the space between them feeling smaller than it had before. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to drag you into this. Stop apologizing, Daniel said. You didn't drag me into anything. I chose to be here. Why? He looked at her, and for once he didn't try to deflect or make a joke. Because I care about you, he said, and I don't like seeing you hurt. She stared at him, her eyes red and glassy, and he saw something shift in her expression. I care about you too, she said quietly. More than I should. What does that mean? She shook her head. It means this is complicated. You have Emma to think about, your life, and I'm a mess, Daniel. I bring chaos wherever I go. I don't want to pull you into that. Too late, he said. I'm already in. She let out a shaky breath, and before either of them could second-guess it, she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was desperate, like she was drowning, and he was the only thing keeping her afloat. Daniel kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face, and for a moment everything else fell away. The ex, the fear, the uncertainty. It was just them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't," Daniel said. "Don't apologize for that." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "What are we doing?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I don't want to stop." She nodded, and this time when she kissed him, it was slower, softer, like she was trying to memorize the feeling. They stayed like that for a long time, tangled up in each other on the couch, the rest of the world forgotten. When Daniel finally went home just before sunrise, he felt like something inside him had shifted, something fundamental and irreversible. He didn't know what came next, didn't know how to navigate this with Emma, with his job, with all the complications that came with caring about someone like Victoria. But he knew he wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Victoria woke up alone on the couch, the memory of Daniel's kiss still lingering on her lips. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid. She felt something else, something she couldn't quite name, but that felt an awful lot like hope. Hope didn't last long. 3 days after the kiss, Victoria's ex showed up again. This time, Daniel saw him first. He was getting out of his truck after work when the black sedan pulled up in front of Victoria's house. The same man stepped out, but this time he wasn't alone. There was another guy with him, bigger, broader, wearing a suit that looked like it was trying too hard. Daniel's stomach dropped. He walked quickly across the yard, his keys still in his hand, just as the man reached Victoria's front door and knocked. Victoria opened it, and Daniel saw her face go white. "I told you not to come back," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "And I told you we needed to talk," the man said. His tone was smooth, controlled, like he was negotiating a business deal. "I brought Marcus with me, just in case you decided to call your new friend again." The bigger man, Marcus, stood off to the side, arms crossed, his expression blank. "She doesn't want to talk to you," Daniel said, stepping up onto the porch. "So leave." The man turned, his mouth curving into a thin smile. "Ah. The knight in shining armor returns. What's your name again?" "Doesn't matter." "It does to me. I like to know who I'm dealing with." He extended a hand. "Garrett Mills, pleased to meet you." Daniel didn't shake it. "Can't say the same." Garrett's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. "You know, I've been doing some research on you, Daniel Hayes, single father, works nights at a distribution center, drives a truck that's seen better days, lives paycheck to paycheck." He paused. "You're way out of your depth here." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "It's supposed to make you think," Garrett said. "Victoria comes from a different world than you do. She has responsibilities, assets, a reputation to maintain. You think she's going to throw all that away for someone like you?" "I think she can make her own decisions." "Can she?" Garrett looked past Daniel to Victoria. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's running away from herself. Again." "That's enough," Victoria said, her voice sharp. "You need to leave. Now." "Or what?" Garrett asked. "You'll call the police? File another restraining order that'll expire in 6 months? We both know how this ends, Victoria. You always come back." "Not this time." Garrett studied her for a long moment, then sighed like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "Fine," he said. "I'll go. But I'm not done with this conversation, and neither are you." He turned to Daniel. "You should think carefully about what you're getting into. Victoria has a habit of burning bridges. It'd be a shame if you got caught in the fire." He walked back to the car, Marcus following silently behind him. As they pulled away, Daniel turned to Victoria. She was gripping the doorframe so hard her knuckles were white. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she said. "I'm not." She stepped back into the house, and Daniel followed, closing the door behind them. Inside, Victoria paced back and forth, her hands shaking. "He knows who you are," she said. "He looked you up. That means he's serious." "I don't care if he's serious," Daniel said. "He doesn't get to intimidate you, or me." "You don't understand what he's capable of." "Then tell me." She stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes red. "He ruins people, Daniel. Anyone who gets in his way. He's done it before. He'll do it again." "How?" "However he needs to. He has lawyers, investigators, connections everywhere. He can make your life hell without ever breaking the law. Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. What's he going to do? Get me fired? Maybe. Or maybe he'll dig into your past, find something to use against you, make it so you can't see Emma anymore. Daniel's blood ran cold. He wouldn't. He would, Victoria said, because that's what he does. He finds what matters to you and he takes it away. For the first time since this whole thing started, Daniel felt real fear. Not for himself, for Emma. Then what do we do? He asked quietly. Victoria sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. I don't know. Daniel sat down next to her, his mind racing. He dealt with plenty of problems in his life. Money problems, custody problems, problems that felt like they'd never end. But this was different. This was a man with resources, with power, who wanted something and didn't care who he hurt to get it. Maybe you should give him what he wants, Daniel said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Victoria's head snapped up. What? Not actually, he said quickly, but make him think you're considering it. Buy us some time to figure out what to do. You want me to lie to him? I want you to survive this, Daniel said. And if that means playing along for a little while, then yeah, that's what I want. Victoria stared at him, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. I can't do that, she said finally. If I give him even an inch, he'll take everything. That's how it works with him. Then we go to the police. Again, tell them he's harassing you. They won't do anything, not without proof. Then we get proof. Record him the next time he shows up. And what happens when he figures it out? Victoria asked. When he realizes I'm trying to build a case against him, you think he'll just walk away? Daniel didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. Finally, Victoria said, You should stay away from me. Daniel looked at her. What? You should stay away, she repeated, her voice cracking. Before this gets worse. Before he does something to you or Emma. I'm not worth it, Daniel. Don't say that. It's true. She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. I've been nothing but trouble since the day I showed up at your door. You've been kind to me, kinder than I deserve, but I can't keep dragging you into this. You're not dragging me into anything, Daniel said, standing as well. I'm choosing to be here. Then stop choosing, she said, her voice rising. Because sooner or later Garrett's going to hurt you, and I can't live with that. That's not your decision to make. Yes, it is. Her eyes were wet now, tears spilling down her cheeks. Don't you get it? Everyone who gets close to me ends up paying for it. My friends, my family, everyone. I won't let that happen to you, or to Emma. Daniel crossed the room and took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me, he said. I'm not going anywhere. I don't care what he does. I don't care what it costs. You're not alone in this. Not anymore. You don't know what you're saying. Yeah, I do. She looked up at him, and for a moment he thought she was going to argue. But then her face crumpled, and she collapsed against his chest, sobbing. Daniel held her, his arms wrapped tight around her, and he felt something break open inside him, something raw and protective and fierce. He didn't know how to fight a man like Garrett Mills, didn't know how to protect Victoria from someone with that much power. But he'd figure it out. He had to. The next morning, Daniel woke up to a text from an unknown number. Stay away from Victoria Kane. This is your only warning. He stared at the message, his jaw clenched, then deleted it without responding. He wasn't going to be intimidated. Not by some vague threat from a man who thought money made him untouchable, but when he dropped Emma off at daycare that morning, the director pulled him aside. Mr. Hayes, can I speak with you for a moment? Daniel's stomach sank. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, she said, but her tone was careful, measured. We just had someone call this morning asking about Emma, about her enrollment here, her schedule, that sort of thing. Daniel felt ice flood his veins. Who? They said they were from an insurance company, verifying information for a policy update, but it seemed odd. We didn't give them any information, of course. I just thought you should know. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. Thank you. I appreciate you telling me. Of course. If it happens again, we'll let you know immediately. He nodded and walked back to his truck, his hands shaking. Garrett was going after Emma, or at least letting Daniel know he could. By the time he got to work, he was barely holding it together. He clocked in, grabbed his scanner, and started loading trucks on autopilot, his mind churning. He needed to do something. But what? At lunch, he called Victoria. "Hey," she said when she picked up. "Everything okay?" "No," he said. "Someone called Emma's daycare this morning, asking about her." There was a long silence on the other end. "Victoria?" "I'm here," she said, her voice tight. "It was him, wasn't it?" "I don't know, but I'm guessing." "I'm so sorry, Daniel. Don't," he interrupted. "Don't apologize. Just help me figure out what to do." "I don't know what to do," she said, and he could hear the desperation in her voice. "I've been thinking about it all night. I don't know how to stop him." Daniel leaned against the side of his truck, staring out at the parking lot. "Then maybe it's time we stop trying to play defense." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we need to make him back off. Make it not worth his time to keep coming after you." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." There was another silence, and then Victoria said, "Daniel, please don't do anything stupid." Define stupid. "You know what I mean." He did, but he also knew that sitting around waiting for Garrett to make the next move wasn't an option. "I'll call you later," he said. "Daniel?" He hung up before she could finish. That night, after he put Emma to bed, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and started digging. He didn't know much about Garrett Mills, but the internet did. It didn't take long to find him. CEO of a tech company, board member of half a dozen others, investor in everything from real estate to startups. His net worth was listed in the hundreds of millions, and his face appeared in dozens of articles, always smiling, always confident, always in control. Daniel kept digging. He found interviews, profiles, old news stories. And then he found something interesting. 3 years ago, Garrett's company had been involved in a lawsuit. A former employee had accused him of misconduct, harassment, intimidation, wrongful termination. The case had been settled out of court, the details sealed. Daniel clicked through a few more links and found 2 more similar cases. Both settled. Both sealed. He sat back in his chair, his mind racing. This wasn't just about Victoria. This was a pattern. He grabbed his phone and called her. "Hey," she said, "what's going on?" "I found something," he said. "Your ex. He's been sued before, multiple times, always for the same stuff, harassment, intimidation, always settled out of court." There was a pause. "I didn't know that. Did he ever do anything like that while you were together?" "Not to me," she said, "but there were rumors, people who worked for him who left suddenly. I never asked too many questions." "Maybe you should start," Daniel said, "because if we can find other people he's done this to, people who'd be willing to talk—" "They won't," Victoria interrupted. "That's the whole point of the settlements. He makes them sign NDAs. They can't talk about it." "Not legally, maybe, but that doesn't mean they won't." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You think we could build a case against him?" "I think we could try. That would take time. Months, maybe. And in the meantime, we keep you safe," Daniel said, "and we make sure he knows we're not backing down." "How?" "I'm still working on that part." She let out a shaky laugh. "You're insane, you know that?" "Yeah," he said. "I've been told." They talked for a while longer, throwing around ideas, most of them bad. But by the time they hung up, Daniel felt like they at least had a direction. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next day, Garrett showed up again. This time, Daniel was ready. He was outside working on his truck when the black sedan pulled up. Garrett stepped out, alone this time, and walked across the yard toward Victoria's house. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and intercepted him. "She doesn't want to see you," he said. Garrett stopped, his hands in his pockets, his expression calm. "I wasn't asking permission." "Yeah, well, I'm not giving you a choice," Garrett smiled. "You know, I admire your persistence. Really, I do. But you're fighting a losing battle here." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But I'm still fighting." "For what?" Garrett asked. "For her? You think she's going to stay with you? You think this little fantasy you've built is going to last?" "I think that's none of your business." Garrett laughed. "Everything about Victoria is my business. We built a life together, a company, a future. She doesn't get to just walk away from that because she's having some kind of crisis." "She already did." No, Garrett said, his smile fading. She ran. And sooner or later, she's going to realize that running doesn't solve anything. When that happens, I'll be there, and you won't. Daniel took a step closer, his jaw tight. You need to leave. Now. Or what? Garrett asked, his voice soft and dangerous. You'll hit me? Go ahead. I've got a lawyer on speed dial. You'll be in jail before the bruise even forms. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. I'm not going to hit you, but I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Is that a threat? It's a promise. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Then Garrett smiled again. Good luck with that. He turned and walked back to his car, and Daniel watched him go, his heart pounding. He didn't know if what he'd just done was brave or stupid, probably both, but he meant what he'd said. He was going to find a way to stop Garrett Mills, whatever it took. When he turned around, Victoria was standing on her porch, her face pale. You shouldn't have done that, she said. Probably not. He's going to come after you now. Let him. She walked down the steps and across the yard, stopping in front of him. Daniel, I'm serious. He's not going to let this go. Neither am I. She looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression, something that looked like fear and gratitude all at once. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Victoria stared at him, her eyes wide, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she stepped forward and kissed him, hard and desperate, and Daniel kissed her back, pouring everything he couldn't say into it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. I love you too, she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. That night, they sat together in Victoria's living room, the curtains drawn, the house locked up tight. What do we do now? Victoria asked. We fight, Daniel said. Together. She nodded, her hand finding his. Together, she repeated. And in that moment, Daniel knew that whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. Fighting back turned out to be harder than either of them expected. The first step was finding the people Garrett had hurt before. Daniel spent his nights after Emma went to bed combing through old news articles, court filings, anything he could find online. Victoria helped when she could, but most of the names were buried under legal settlements, an ND. As that made reaching out nearly impossible. Then 2 weeks after their confrontation with Garrett, Victoria got a call from a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Is this Victoria Kane? The voice on the other end was female, cautious. Yes, who is this? My name is Lauren Chen. I used to work for Garrett Mills. I heard through a mutual contact that you were looking for people who've had issues with him. Victoria's heart raced. I am. Can we meet? They met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, somewhere Garrett wouldn't think to look. Lauren was in her early 30s, composed but visibly nervous. She ordered tea she didn't drink and kept glancing at the door like she expected someone to walk in. I signed an NDA, Lauren said quietly. If anyone finds out I'm talking to you, I could lose everything. I understand, Victoria said, but anything you can tell me, even off the record, it could help. Lauren looked down at her cup. He made my life hell for 6 months. I was his assistant. I was good at my job. But when I told him I was engaged, he changed. Started making comments about my fiancé, about how I was wasting my potential settling down. Then he started calling me after hours, showing up at places I went with friends. When I complained to HR, they offered me a settlement and a reference if I signed the NDA and left quietly. Did you take it? Of course I did. I needed the money and I was terrified of what he'd do if I didn't. She finally looked up, her eyes hard. But I've regretted it every day since, because I know he's done it to other people, and he's going to keep doing it. Victoria reached across the table and took her hand. Not if we stop him. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. How? I don't know yet, but I'm not backing down this time. Over the next few weeks, Victoria and Daniel found 3 more people willing to talk. None of them could go on the record, but they shared their stories, patterns of control, manipulation, retaliation. Garrett's methods were consistent: isolate, intimidate, and when that didn't work, bury them in legal fees until they gave up. But knowing his pattern, and stopping him were two different things. Daniel was loading his truck one evening when his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Hayes, this is Jennifer Park from Child Protective Services. We received a report concerning your daughter, Emma. We need to schedule a home visit. Daniel's blood went cold. A report? What kind of report? I can't discuss the details over the phone, but we take all reports seriously. Can you meet with me tomorrow at 2? I work tomorrow. Then we'll need to reschedule. But this is time-sensitive, Mr. Hayes. The sooner we can complete our investigation, the better. Daniel gripped the phone so hard he thought it might crack. Fine. Tomorrow at 2. He hung up and immediately called Victoria. He's going after Emma, he said, his voice shaking. He called CPS, made up some bullshit report to get them to investigate me. Victoria's voice was tight. What did they say? That they need to do a home visit tomorrow. Okay, we can handle this. Your house is fine, Emma's fine. They won't find anything because there's nothing to find. That's not the point, Daniel said, his anger finally breaking through. The point is he's using my daughter to get to me, to get to you. I know. I can't let him do this, Victoria. I can't. You won't, she said. We're going to end this, I promise. But promises were easier than action. The CPS worker showed up the next day, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with a clipboard and a sympathetic expression. She walked through Daniel's house, asked him questions about Emma's routine, his work schedule, whether there were any substances in the home. She spoke to Emma privately, who told her about her toys and her favorite cartoons and how Daddy made the best pancakes. When it was over, the worker closed her notebook and gave Daniel a small, weary smile. Everything looks fine, Mr. Hayes. I'll file my report and close the case. I'm sorry you had to go through this. Can I ask who made the report? It was anonymous. Of course it was. She hesitated, then said quietly, For what it's worth, I see a lot of these calls. Custody disputes, angry exes, people trying to weaponize the system. It's awful, and I'm sorry. But you're doing a good job. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Daniel nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. After she left, he sat on the couch and put his head in his hands. Emma climbed up next to him, her small hand patting his shoulder. Are you sad, Daddy? No, Bug. I'm just tired. Do you want to watch cartoons with me? He looked at her, this perfect, innocent little person who had no idea what was happening around her, and felt something harden in his chest. Garrett Mills wanted a fight. Fine. He'd get one. That night, Daniel and Victoria sat at her kitchen table, a laptop open between them. We're not going to win this by playing nice, Daniel said. We need to hit him where it hurts. How? His reputation. He's built this image of himself, successful, untouchable. If we can crack that, if we can show people who he really is, he loses his power. Victoria frowned. You want to go public? I want to make enough noise that he can't ignore it. Maybe we can't get the people he's hurt to go on the record, but we can make people ask questions, start digging, put pressure on him. That's risky. Everything about this is risky. She looked at him, and he saw the fear in her eyes, but also something else, determination. Okay, she said, let's do it. They started small. Victoria reached out to a journalist she'd known years ago, someone who'd written about tech industry misconduct before. She pitched the story carefully, no names yet, just the outline. A pattern of harassment, settlements, NDAs. A powerful man who'd built an empire on the backs of people too scared to speak up. The journalist was interested. Within a week, she'd contacted 2 of the people Victoria and Daniel had found. Both agreed to speak anonymously. The article went live on a Friday morning, and by that afternoon it had been shared thousands of times. Garrett's company issued a statement denying everything, called it a smear campaign, threatened legal action. But the damage was done. 2 more former employees came forward, then 3 more. The story grew, and with it, the scrutiny. Garrett's board called an emergency meeting. Investors started asking questions. And then, one evening, Garrett showed up at Victoria's house. Daniel was there when it happened. He and Victoria were in the kitchen making dinner, something that had become routine over the past few weeks. When the doorbell rang, Victoria froze. I'll get it, Daniel said. He opened the door to find Garrett standing there, and for the first time since Daniel had met him, the man didn't look composed. He looked furious. "I want to talk to Victoria," Garrett said. "Not happening. This is her house, and I'm not letting you in." Garrett's jaw tightened. "You think you've won? You think ruining my reputation is going to make any of this go away?" "I think it's a start." "You have no idea what you've done," Garrett said, his voice low and dangerous. "That article, those lies, they're going to cost me millions. My board is talking about removing me. Do you understand that?" "Good," Daniel said. Garrett took a step forward, and Daniel tensed, ready for whatever came next. But before anything could happen, Victoria appeared behind Daniel. "Garrett," she said, her voice steady. "It's over. You need to leave." "Over?" Garrett laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I'm just going to walk away after everything I did for you? Everything we built?" "You didn't build anything for me," Victoria said. "You built a cage, and I'm done living in it." "You're making a mistake." "No," she said. "I made a mistake when I stayed with you as long as I did, but I'm not making that mistake again." Garrett stared at her, and Daniel saw something crack in his expression, something raw and desperate. "You can't do this," Garrett said, his voice breaking. "We're supposed to be together. That's how this was supposed to work." "That's not how anything works," Victoria said. "You can't force someone to love you. You can't control them into staying. I tried to tell you that, but you wouldn't listen. So now I'm done telling you. I'm just done." For a long moment, Garrett just stood there, his hands clenched at his sides. Then he turned and walked away. Daniel watched him get into his car and drive off, and he felt the tension drain out of his body all at once. Victoria leaned against the doorframe, her eyes closed. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Daniel said, "but I think we just took a big step." The fallout from the article continued for weeks. Garrett's company launched an internal investigation. His board forced him to step down as CEO. More people came forward, and the story kept growing. Victoria testified in a closed-door meeting with the company's legal team, and while she couldn't share the details, Daniel could see the relief in her face when it was over. "They're taking it seriously," she said. "Finally." "Good. It's not going to undo what he did, to me, to the others, but it's something." Daniel pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head against his chest. "It's more than something," he said. "It's everything." Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. Garrett didn't disappear. He was still out there, still fighting the allegations, still trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. But he stopped showing up at Victoria's house, stopped calling, stopped sending messages. For the first time in months, Victoria could breathe. One Saturday morning, Daniel woke up to find Emma sitting at the kitchen table with Victoria, the two of them working on a puzzle together. "Morning," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Daddy," Emma chirped. "Victoria's helping me with the princess puzzle." "I can see that." Victoria looked up at him and smiled, and Daniel felt something warm settle in his chest. This was what normal looked like. This was what safety felt like. Later that afternoon, they took Emma to the park. She ran ahead, climbing on the playground equipment while Daniel and Victoria sat on a bench watching her. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Sure." "What happens now?" "With us, I mean." Daniel looked at her. "What do you want to happen?" She hesitated, then said, "I want this. Whatever this is. I want to keep it." "So do I." "But it's complicated. You have Emma to think about, and I'm still figuring out who I am without Garrett, without all of that." "That's okay," Daniel said. "We'll figure it out together." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe we've been overthinking it." She laughed softly. "Maybe." Emma ran over, breathless and grinning. "Daddy, can Victoria come to dinner with us tonight?" Daniel looked at Victoria, who smiled. "I'd love to," she said. They went to the diner, the same one they'd gone to weeks ago, back when this was all just beginning. Emma ordered pancakes, even though it was dinner time, and Victoria didn't argue. They sat in the booth, eating and talking and laughing, and for a little while the rest of the world fell away. On the way home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, and Daniel carried her inside while Victoria followed. After he tucked Emma into bed, he found Victoria standing in the living room, looking at the photos on the wall, pictures of Emma, of Daniel's parents, of moments captured over the years. "You have a good life here," she said quietly. "I do," Daniel agreed, "but it's better with you in it." She turned to look at him, and he saw tears in her eyes. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," she said. "You didn't have to do anything," he said. "You just had to show up." She closed the distance between them and kissed him, slow and soft, and full of something Daniel couldn't quite name but knew he never wanted to lose. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." And in that moment, Daniel realized that everything, the fear, the fights, the uncertainty, had been worth it. Because this was what love was. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. It was messy and complicated and terrifying. But it was real. And it was theirs. 3 months later, Victoria sold her house. Not because she was running, but because she didn't need a fortress anymore. She found a smaller place just down the street from Daniel, close enough that Emma could walk over whenever she wanted, far enough that they each had their own space. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was just two people choosing to build something together, one day at a time. Daniel helped her move in, and Emma helped by carrying pillows and declaring which room should be the princess room. When the boxes were unpacked and the furniture was in place, they sat on Victoria's new couch, the three of them, and ordered pizza. Emma fell asleep between them, her head on Victoria's lap, and Daniel looked at the two people who had somehow become his whole world. "You okay?" Victoria asked quietly. "Yeah," Daniel said. "I'm okay." And he meant it. Because here's the thing about fear, it doesn't just disappear. It doesn't magically go away because you want it to. But it does get smaller when you stop facing it alone. Daniel had been alone for a long time. He'd convinced himself that was the only way to do it, that asking for help was weakness, that needing someone made you vulnerable. But Victoria had taught him something different. She taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was courage. It was opening the door at 3 in the morning when someone knocked. It was standing firm when a man with more power and money than you could imagine tried to tear you down. It was choosing to love someone even when it was hard, even when it was scary, even when you didn't know how it would end. And maybe that was the point. Maybe love wasn't about knowing how things would end. Maybe it was about showing up anyway. Victoria had shown up that night, terrified and alone, and Daniel had chosen to help her. And in helping her, he'd found something he didn't even know he was missing. A partner, a friend, someone who saw all his flaws and loved him anyway. Someone who made him want to be better, not for her, but for himself. Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about butterflies, and Victoria smiled down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She's amazing," Victoria said softly. "She is," Daniel agreed. "You're a good dad." "I try." Victoria looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest ache in the best way. "You're a good man, Daniel Hayes," she said. "Don't ever forget that." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just reached over and took her hand. They sat like that for a long time, the three of them, while the sun set outside and the world kept turning. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like everything was going to be okay. Not perfect, not easy, but okay. And sometimes okay was enough. Sometimes okay was everything. Because at the end of the day, life wasn't about the big moments. It wasn't about the dramatic showdowns or the perfect endings. It was about the small things, the quiet things. The choice to keep going even when it was hard. The choice to open the door when someone knocked. The choice to love, even when it scared you. Daniel had made that choice the night Victoria showed up at his door. And every day since, he'd kept making it. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. Because she was worth it. And so was he.